So next on our list of TV and video attribution methods, let's go on to the macro method column. So these tend to be top down as opposed to what I call micro methods, which are more bottom up. And I like to start with what's known as econometric models, sometimes known as mixed models, sometimes known as media mixed models. I'm bucketing them all under this econometric umbrella. Now, I know some technical folks might argue, hey, you have time series separate here and they could be considered econometric models. True, yes. I'm separating them out because what I'm calling time series models is a little bit different than what I'm going to be bucketing into econometric models. But certainly econometric models could have time components, and ARIMAs could fit into this, and a lot of other time series methods could fit into under the umbrella of econometric model. Let's get into the details, though, of how this works, why it works or does not work, and what goes wrong. So it all goes back to kind of stats 101. If folks remember the old formula y equals mx plus b. So this is the formula for regression. Y is some variable of interest to the brand. So it might be revenue, it might be users, number of users, some other metric. X might be some type of marketing, a marketing input. So maybe this is TV spend. Maybe it's SEM spend, or maybe it's how many impressions we bought on TV. It's some measure of a marketing channel. And then what we are going to try to do is solve for the slope. So what's the multiplier for on television spend to get us to this whole revenue for the brand plus some intercept term, just an additive value that we're going to put in to make this formula more accurate. Now in practice, obviously there are other marketing channels. And so when you see econometric models at play in brands, you're going to see much more complicated formulas. So you might have, Y plus Z plus a bunch of other things where X might be TV spend, Y might be SEM, Z might be direct mail or email or affiliates. It could be, anything under the sun. And that's usually what ends up happening is everything under the sun gets added in, because what inevitably happens is you build the model, you realize it doesn't work, you quickly find that there's another feature that you need to add in that hasn't been accounted for, some other marketing campaign going on in another department that you didn't account for that's spending a bunch of money, and then you have to kind of add them in. So that's what ends up happening in practice. And therein leads to the problem. So while in theory, it would be beautiful if we could put in, have a total picture of how all of our marketing impacts the end result. In practice, I've never seen one of these actually work at giving significant utility. And in fact, it tends to be a real mess where, companies will invest millions to build up their econometric model. And then they're so invested in it that even though it's completely broken, you could poke all these holes in it, they'll keep investing more, saying, well, if we just add one more thing into this, if we make one more correction here, it'll get better. It never gets better. It just keeps getting messier and messier until finally you just throw it away and give up. That's what I've said. I've been in this industry now for 20-something, a little less than 20 years, and never seen this work in practice. So let's talk about why this fails so often. So a few things, obviously from a statistics standpoint, my career started in statistics, and the first thing I look at are what are the assumptions of the model that you chose. And so is Y equals MX plus B, this is a linear model, which means it has all the linear requirements, so it has to, you have to have independence of observations, meaning each row that goes in has to be independent of the next. That never happens. It has to have equal variance. So it has to pass a bunch of kind of technical tests that you, in most cases, can show don't pass. So then you end up having to do more complicated formulas. But, that's the first thing I look at is the structure right? But there's an even easier way to poke a hole poke a hole in this and realize that it doesn't work. And that is garbage in, garbage out. And in practice, you know how difficult it is to get accurate data for just one of these things? Because most of these teams, we're talking about large brands now, most of these are run by different teams that are collecting data in different ways, and there's a lot of nuance to what the meaning is behind each of the inputs. And so just getting an accurate value, an accurate piece of data for each of these inputs turns out to be problematic. And then, as you extend your model out, because it's I left something out, it's misspecified because I left something important out. As you add more things in, there's more avenues that this whole thing can break, because now you have to ensure that the inputs remain accurate over time. And then guess what? The head of one of the teams that is input over here left, that data suddenly goes to garbage. Suddenly your entire model is broken. And so this is just a really nice way that consulting firms make a lot of money, is by doing this. But in practice, it just really it's garbage in, garbage out, and very quickly you'll realize getting everything correct to make these things work is impractical. Lots could go wrong. But there's another issue here, which is even if you were to get everything exactly right, time is a very big piece of this puzzle. So what is the impact of time on your input versus your output? So if you were to make large investments on television now, will you be seeing all the impact in the same period that we're measuring here? No, probably not. So what ends up happening is you end up having to put time elements. So like this maybe is a 30-day window, or maybe it's a 6-month window. And then you're going to have to put buckets and add lag features for like, hey, this is 30 days ago, this is 60 days ago for TV. Again, it's adding more complexity to this model that's already failing most of its assumptions. But then it gets even more interesting, because beyond just having to add time features to the specification, you also then have, even if it's perfectly specified, you also have this problem of multicollinearity. And what I mean by that is when inputs correlate with each other. And television and SEM is a great example of how this works. So when I increase my investment on TV, and actually let's add SEO to this, because that it plays a role in this. But when I increase my TV spend, guess what ends up happening? Because majority of users end up coming sideways, with a few exceptions, into websites, meaning they use search engines. What's going to end up happening is that your SEM costs are going to go up, unless you're doing some type of controlling. But usually these are different teams. And so television increases its spend. That's going to drive traffic to your keywords on SEM. If you're doing things correctly on the SEM side, you should be buying your brand keywords, which means your SEM costs are going to balloon up. And then guess what? Suddenly now, when I increased on TV, SEM is also going up. And so now the model has no way of knowing, is it SEM that caused the increase in revenue, or is it TV that caused the increase in revenue? Why? It's because these two correlate with each other. When inputs to a model correlate, that's called multicollinearity. And there's no clean way of controlling for that within the structure of this model. And so, in fact, what I usually see happening when I'm brought into messes like this is there's misattribution, where SEM is getting a lot of the credit that TV should be getting. And also, one of the other things to keep in mind is really television is causing these SEM costs. So TV is causing your SEM costs to go up, which is then causing this value to go up in your model, which then is causing and driving downstream impact to your business. And so how do you reconcile for that? Turns out this leads to some interesting conversations within brands. But anyway, so you could already tell I do not like this method. It's a good way for consulting firms to make a lot of money, because you're going to just be perpetually fixing it. It's like a leaky valve that you keep putting more and more tape and glue on the valve, but it's just going to keep on leaking and spring leaks from different areas. So there are better approaches to this. Now, does that mean there's no utility to doing something like this? There's some cases where I've used mixed models, like if I'm trying to figure out how to distribute marketing spend across channels, and I do it at a very, very high time level. And even then, I'm not really comfortable with the results. So I'm close to a no utility to this, but this is debatable, and there are people that could come forward with counter arguments, and I would say, yeah, there's people that are knowledgeable about this that would disagree with me on it. But just be aware of the problems and the mess that you're going to be dealing with if you go down this path. For that reason, I do not recommend using it for television analysis.